Carr, I think a publisher who lives in town, an editor who lives in town said, you know, the hard thing about a writers group is that when you ask for help, people want to give you help. So if you ask writers to give you criticism, they're going to give you criticism, maybe even if there was no reason to critique the things that are discussed. And I think that's true. I also think we're all writers. And so when you hear a good story, especially one that's well told, you want to make it your own. And so then you start giving feedback to make the story yours rather than to let the story stay in the voice of the writer. And sometimes we like to show off, like we just want to show off all the fun little craft terms we know. And so that can be kind of damaging. So I think I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning, and I listened to a lot of things I shouldn't have listened to. There's one thing that I'm just starting to do now, and I wish I would have done this when I was a younger writer. And it was something that it was introduced to me by Felicia Rose Chavez in her book about anti-racist creative workshopping. And that's to write an artist statement, which is something, it actually goes against what often we're told to do in writers group, which is you have the gag rule, you're silent. Like the writer just listens and processes, and you don't defend your work. You just listen. And an artist statement is something that's used in other disciplines all the time. So for example, if you go in the museum and you see a white placard on the wall next to a big painting, that's an artist statement. It's where the artist gets to describe their process and what was informing what they were doing. You know, it puts the art in context. It says when the art happened. So you get all of that background information. If you go to see dance, sometimes they have choreographer talks where the choreographer describes their process and how long it took and the challenges they faced and all this stuff. And writers don't do that. We usually don't talk, unless it's interviews well after, you know, our book comes out. We usually don't talk very much about our process. And I don't think we even think very much about our own thinking. And that's a problem when you're sharing your work with other people and getting feedback, because if we don't know what we did right ourselves and what our vision was ourselves, then I think we are vulnerable to thinking other people are the expert on our work. And so, so I'm doing it now, and I'll tell you how to do an artist statement if you ever want to try this yourself. And this isn't something you have to show to anyone, you can, but just so you know yourself what you're going for. You start off with like a 2-sentence description of what your work is all about. And then you ask the following questions. You ask, you know, what surprised you while you're working on this project? What challenged you? What success came from this project? What's your vision for future drafts? And what questions do you have for anyone who wants to give you feedback? So what do you need help sorting out? And I just really believe that doing this will help you kind of know your mind. You won't feel like a fraud. I know so many writers, myself included, who we feel like frauds because it feels like the muse gave us this beautiful story and we don't know where it came from and we don't know really how it worked, and maybe that muse won't come back again. And so, but it's not, I mean, I do believe that we can prepare ourselves for kind of a creative flow, but you're prepared. You did something right to get to the stage where you get to write the story. And so knowing how that works is really important, especially if you're going to show your work to other people, because then you can take what they say as an opinion and not the truth. Like only you should really know the truth about your writing. You should be the only expert on your writing.
My Northern trilogy is called Laurentian Divide, and the first one is Vacation Land, which I'm still going with. That book is from 2014, and it's still a community read in a lot of places. And there's a lot of characters in that first book, and then it narrows down to just 3 in this book, Laurentian Divide. And the first little bit is just the introduction, and it is the transcript of the polka service on November 10th, and this is just before a very bad winter. And my town is called Hatchet Inlet, and so this is the pastor. and his name is Pastor Dan Hutala of the St. Urho's Church of the Pines. What could Hatchet Inlet, here at the edge of the wilderness, have in common with 3rd century Rome? You might not know that the St. Lawrence River Divide that T-bones our own Laurentian Divide is named for a Roman. St. Lawrence was the archdeacon of Rome, where he held the purse strings as treasurer. A good man when Rome had its share of bad ones, like the Emperor Valerian. Think Darth Vader, only not too bright. Kicking Christians out of Rome wasn't enough for Valerian, so he decided to kill them. He sentenced Lawrence to death, but only after he ordered him to turn over the church's treasures. Lawrence stalled, claiming he'd need 3 days to pull the coffers together since they were scattered all over Rome. But on the sly, he was doling out the treasure to the needy, all of it. Then he gathered his entourage, widows and peasants, lunatics and orphans, and presented them to Valerian as the true treasures of Rome. You can imagine the emperor wasn't amused, and he ordered Lawrence to be roasted on a spit. The story is that when he was half seared, he said, "Stick a fork in me, I'm done," or something like that. For his trouble, Lawrence was declared patron saint of cooks and comedians. I chose Lawrence for today's sermon because he was an immigrant. He'd gone to Rome to do good work and find a better life. An immigrant just like all of our grandparents, like the Mexican boys working over at the pulp mill, or our own Cam down at the noodle place. And we all know Veshko here. We see the faces on the news every day. Refugees drowned by the boatload. Countries shutting their doors to those in need. Fools making noise about building walls. That's what we've come to. I want to think that here in Hatchet Inlet, we are better than that, because we have to be better than that. This congregation has suffered mighty blows, and we have plenty of healing ahead of us. Farmer's Almanac says this winter is going to be a doozy, people. Let's take these coming months to reflect, mourn, and pray. Spring will come, even on days like this, when it doesn't seem possible. Spring will come. In the meantime, if you see a stranger, welcome them. If you see someone is lonely, sit down with them and share a coffee. If you know someone in these families grieving or in pain, listen. Pull out the earbuds and just listen. Don't turn away. Make it a point to give of yourself, and it will come back to you in spades. Okay, one housekeeping item before we begin. I'd like to remind everyone that plows are out and that odd side parking begins this evening. And now, without further ado, I invite the accordionists to approach the lectern from the left. And if the brass will line up on the right, we can get this show on the road. Go with God. Now let's polka. I think sometimes the most mundane things make the best stories when the right characters and settings and intent are involved behind that, and the language, of course, and the prose. So I mean, I think that you can make a trip to the grocery store be important and literary, and I think of writers like Alice Munro, who do such a wonderful job of making the everyday into a good story. My books are not very plot driven. They're much more character driven. And that's not to say that there's not stories in them. There's definitely, I definitely have plots, beginnings, middles, and ends, and all of those things. But for me, it's the writing. It is the thing that I'm the most drawn to when I'm reading. But as far as story goes, I would say things that you can relate to, that your readers can relate to. I mean, if a story is not grabbing me and keeping me interested, and as the writer, there's no way that it's going to pull in a reader for very long. So, and it will need those elements of the writing and the style.
I love having a writing mentor or a writing group. I recommend it to everyone. It's really tough. It's a tough process. And I think finding someone, I have one person that I go back to a lot because I trust her, and she will destroy a piece of mine. She's just another writer. She works at a self-publishing company, and she is a phenomenal editor. She redlined the piece so embarrassingly I couldn't even see my own writing. But I think when we write, we kind of have this like one idea spiraling in our head or one way of speaking, and we know it behind our head. So when we're writing it, editors and mentors and writing groups can catch things like, what does this even mean? Even though I had, the sentence made sense to me. But so I have one person I kind of go to a lot. The Loft Literary Center in Minneapolis, downtown Minneapolis, was a really, really wonderful place to go and bounce ideas. Like, there are a lot of like working groups that you have in those classes, so you can bounce ideas off people, edit each other's work. The teacher does some editing, and it's just a good perspective to have. Working with editors, like that's that tweet again. It's like 30% of the process is just getting your work destroyed, but it always is like the best part of the process because it makes it so much better. One of my editors, the process is like, we come up with the idea, I create an outline, then she reviews the outline, plucks out things she wants me to focus on, and then I write the first draft, and then I give her the first draft. She edits it, like slays all the sentences, kills my babies or whatever. And then I go back in for the final draft. And that second draft, when she gives it back to me, like the first few times I was so disheartened because it's so hard. Because you're like, I send it out to the world. I'm like, I feel okay about that. And then she gives it back and it's like, never sucks. It's just a lot of feedback. And that's part of the process. And it's probably the most valuable part, and finding someone you trust that can kind of bounce those ideas off of. I actually have, I have a few books. I put aside a few books of my favorite authors and writers to kind of like come up with ideas and quotes in here. And as far as like a book that could be a good mentor, I'm sure everyone has heard of this, Anne Lamott and Bird by Bird. She gives a lot of advice on writing groups and how important and crucial they are, and just getting someone else's perspective. So I highly recommend.
Tell young Sarah to stop waiting for other people to tell you your writing is good enough. To find a way to learn how to decide for myself. I think I would tell myself to get good people in my corner to give me feedback, but don't make other people responsible for telling you who you are and what you're capable of. I think I'm still doing that. Like it's one of the hardest things to kick. That's why this artist statement thing is so intriguing to me, to actually take ownership of my voice. And because it's hard, especially when you're writing for children, the audience is so present. You're thinking about what they want. Sometimes more than you're thinking, especially also if you're hired to do a job, you're thinking about what the editor wants, what the illustrator might want, what the marketing team might be able to push, if you're writing about a person, what are they going to think of it if they read it? What are children going to think? What are teachers going to think? Teachers and parents are the gateways often to the child. The child doesn't get to pick the book or buy it. So it's really hard to just write for yourself. And so I need to learn, that's what I'm trying to, I wish I would have started this journey a long time ago, because I wouldn't have so much self-doubt, and fraud syndrome. Oh man, that's really hard. Luckily I have, I'm in 3 different writing groups. So I have people that I really trust to help me. And I know myself. enough to know that when I write something down, I'm going to fall desperately in love with it. I think it's perfect. And I'll be shocked when people say anything else. I'm expecting everyone just to say, Sarah, you're a genius. Like, how did I never know this before? Wow. So I know that that time piece is really important, so I can have a little bit of clarity around what I've written. And oh boy, it is hard. It's hard to know, because I also think that for some of us, our voice maybe hasn't fit kind of the mainstream ways that we tell stories and accept stories. So when I was first writing and submitting stories at the Loft, some of the feedback I got was, and it was just about, Black and brown heroes. That's, those are the people I wanted to write about, write picture books about. And it was about my life, as a Black mixed writer growing up in South Minneapolis. Lovely stories, that weren't particularly scary or threatening, but I got feedback that they were niche stories, that they needed to only be submitted to publishers that published about issues-based ideas. And so for a long time, I didn't trust myself very much. And I really relied on other people to tell me whether or not what I was doing was any good, or how readers would respond to it, if they'd respond in a positive way. So I think that's a hard thing. If you feel like if you've lost faith in your voice because of how maybe teachers or mentors have reacted to your stories, it's extra important to find people who can give you more realistic feedback, and who don't who maybe think outside of the box like you do. So yeah.